Hi class, good day. Today I am going to discuss with you the last material that I shared on Google Classroom. And I believe there is a need for me to talk about the contents of the material that I posted on the Google Classroom, since this material will be your guide for you to create the project in our course, EM23 Stylistics and Discourse Analysis. So obviously you already know what it is. Of course, it is the process in doing stylistic investigation if you use the foregrounding theory. Foregrounding theory was already discussed in the video lectures that I made, specifically in Unit 2, and a portion of it was also tackled in Unit 1. So at this point, allow me to share my screen to everyone. So here it is. Okay, now the material that I posted to you, this is the process in stylistic investigation using foregrounding theory, and in this case, I will also be giving a sample. So if we do not know actually, class, how to do a stylistic investigation using the foregrounding theory of Geoffrey Leach, it is pretty much really difficult if we are going to do the stylistic investigation using this theory without knowing how to do it. So just a recap, you already know what is stylistics, and you also know what is foregrounding. I hope you could still recall. And obviously the foregrounding theory, this is by Geoffrey Leach. So obviously when we say stylistics, we are going to deal with style, or we are going to look into or explore the style of the author, and we will conduct a systematic investigation, hoping, or with our end, or with our target or outcome, to be able to come up with an analysis, at the same time an objective interpretation of the text. I told you already, when we say stylistics, it is here where literature and language are being considered as one. We make use of literature as our piece, and we are going to analyze or interpret it using the language or the linguistic side, how the authors use a language in order for him or her to express and write that particular piece of literature. So that is something that we have to really remember in layman's term, or in simple terms. And there are so many theories, obviously, when in doing stylistic investigation. And in this video lecture, we will focus on the foregrounding theory. So let's go now to number 1, the process in stylistic investigation using foregrounding theory. So when we say stylistic investigation, class, we need to do it properly so that we will have a clear direction on what we are going to do, and at the same time, we have a uniform outcome. So there are 3 steps that I proposed in this material, and that is, of course, there are 3 phases, and I basically consider or look into first the foregrounding theory of Geoffrey Leach. So we must be able to know what are these 3 phases, and these are the following. Phase 1 is identification of foregrounded parts. Phase 2, classification of foregrounded parts as to linguistic forms. And phase 3 is we will do the narrative analysis of foregrounded parts alongside with its interpretation. So when we say identification of foregrounded parts, it is here where we are going to be we are going to scrutinize the text line by line. So in scrutinizing the text line by line, we are going to look for portions of the line that are foregrounded. You know already, if it is foregrounded, it could either be in the form of parallelism or deviation. So when we say, of course, parallelism, there is a very evident repetition of sounds, words, so more or less there is repetition. And once it is repeated, obviously, it must be being emphasized by the writer. Well, when we say deviation, so violations in a lot of aspects, not only in the graphology, but there could also be violation in the syntax, grammatical, or even morphological, phonological. We could also have semantic deviation, deviation of register, and historical deviation. So more or less, if we are given with very short poems, we call them micro poems. It's not much that we can really extract because it's not a long poem. And we will start with micro poems, like the ones written by E. Cummings, or even the ones written by one of the mainstream poets now, or like a millennial poets. We have Rupi Kaur, which her work is being considered as the sample for this article, or for this material rather. So as what I told you, there are three phases. So in phase one, we are going to scrutinize first the text line by line. So we are going to write. So for example, you found this portion, there is a foregrounded, so you're going to write it, what it is. Okay, and then if there's none, of course, you leave it blank because you haven't find any foregrounded element. Okay, so that's the phase one. That's what I said. It's the first step that should be done by the learner. So we have to dissect here the poetry by line. So we have to label when we are going to create. We are going to make a matrix and then we will label it. So I believe it's shown here. So for example, the poem that you are, okay, for example, the poem that you are investigating is composed of 5 lines. Okay, let's say it's a micro poem, so it's really a short poem, diba? So it is composed of 5 lines. So if it is composed of 5 lines, that means you have to create like this. So line 1, you have to write here in this portion what it is that can be found in line 1, or what are the words, or what is line 1, and you write here also line 2, line 3, and until line 5, because your poem is composed of 5 lines only. So in this case, you have to just copy, okay, what you can find in the poem that you're investigating. So next is you're going to take a look at on the foregrounded parts. Okay, so you will select or dissect, and at the same time you're going to pick some foregrounded parts. So for example, sa line 1, pag wa mo'y makita, of course you leave it blank. Pero pag naa, you are going to put it either deviation or parallelism. So for example, sa line 1, wala kay nakita nga any deviation, or there's no foregrounded part at all, so leave it blank. Then when you go to line 2, there is a foregrounded part. So you have to write that. So it could be, if it's deviation, ay mga grammatical error that you can see, or if it is parallelism, it could be that there is a repetition. But it doesn't mean, class, that you are going to consider line 2 when you're going to analyze, or when you're going to select or pick the foregrounded part, because especially in parallelism, when we say a repetition, it could be that that particular word or phrase is found in line 1 and then it is repeated in line 2, depending if what place it is being repeated. So in that case, you have to consider, because there is shall we say, a specific type for such repetition. We can take a look at, of course, literary devices, and we will be redirected to those types of repetitions as well that can be found in poetry. So we will be doing that. So this is the first phase. So since it's the first phase, it is a must that we have to create this table. Okay, so we are going to write first all the lines here, copy and paste lang from the poem. And then you're going to take a look at if there is a deviation that you can find in line 1, and if there is parallelism. So it can be obviously that in line 1, you find deviation, and at the same time, nasa siya parallelism. And it could be that the parallelism here would be occurring not only in line 1, but all the way to line 3. So let's say na ay phrase nga ginabalik-balik na sa line 1 na mentioned siya in the initial position. At the same time, in line 2, it is also mentioned in initial position until line 3. So that could be an example already of parallelism. So imo lang na siyang i-bracket to be able to label that specific parallel foregrounded parts is found in 3 lines. So for example, my love for you is true. My love for you is my love for you will never die. my love for you is the only thing I am holding on to until now. So if you're going to consider that, that means my love is being mentioned 3 times, and it occurs in the initial position in line 1, line 2, and line 3. This is just an example, huh? And then you are going to put a bracket here. My love is being repeated, blah, blah, blah. So you are not going to categorize pa if what type of linguistic form it is later na. So, aray sa first phase. Mo kasi na yung buhatan. Okay, so it shall be noted, class, that the number of rows after the column heading is dependent on the number of lines of the poem being stylistically investigated. So, it doesn't mean na permi siya 5 rows here. No, what if you are investigating a poem which is composed of 10 lines? Of course, there will be 10 rows that you are going to put in your matrix. Now let's proceed to phase 2. The phase 2 here is, given that you already was able to identify the foregrounded parts in the poem that you are stylistically investigating, obviously we are now ready to classify them to what linguistic forms. Okay, the foregrounded parts you were able to pick up belong. So classification of foregrounded parts to linguistic forms is the second step that should be done by the learners. So in this phase, the learners actually need to classify the linguistic forms manifested by the identified foregrounded parts. So the types of deviation and parallelism must be identified in this step. So using the table given in phase 1, we are going to add lang columns after deviation and after parallelism. So earlier we have 3 columns. Now we are going to have 5 columns. So here, the learners, we need now our linguistic prowess, our knowledge on deviation and parallelism, as well as how do we classify them based on their types, as being mentioned by Geoffrey Leach, diba? So it must be noted that they have to consider Geoffrey Leach classification because Geoffrey Leach was able to identify the different types of deviation and parallelism. So for us to be guided accordingly, I believe I discussed this in unit 2, especially in the last portion of the unit. So please go back there if you cannot follow about Geoffrey Leach classification. So this is now the matrix here. So earlier in the example, there are 5 kintahay na 5 ka lines sa imong poem. So the same thing, muad lang ka og duha ka columns, so deviation, then linguistic forms, parallelism, and then linguistic forms. And what we are going to do now is i-identify na nato. For example, sa line 1, you were able to identify deviation. For example, she don't. Diba? If we are going to say she don't there does not actually agree with the subject. So that is an example of syntactic deviation because there is a problem with the agreement, no? Agreement of the verb with the subject with its verb, or the verb with its subject. So ang verb always mo agree sa subject. It is not like the verb is as is and then we are going to change the subject to make things correct. So always the verb agrees to the subject. And then if parallelism, what is it? Is it anaphora? Is it cataphora? I think you already probably have this in your literary device or in your literature classes. So those are some of the literary devices. In fact, metaphor could also be included here. For example, we are going to say war is peace. So that is a metaphor because you are now giving a different definition of the word war, or peace is war, diba? So that is a metaphor. So you are also going to put it here. And then when you identify, you are going to say that is metaphor. Okay. And that is definitely class under lexical. Because when we say parallelism, naatay gitawag og lexical ba siya? Okay, phonological ba siya? If we are going to categorize, because if it is a phonological, the repetition happen to be sound niya nga level. Sound ba? Okay, for example, the sound S, the consonant S is repeated many times, so that is under that is under phonological. Pero if it is a word that is being repeated, only a word, that is of course lexical, no? So you have to also know that when you categorize. So That is why I really discuss this, because there is a need, no? So it shall be noticed that additional columns are added, and one after division while another one after parallelism. So the column that we added, class, we call that the linguistic forms. And it is in here where the learners write or encode rather their classification of the foregrounded parts found in a specific line. Again, it shall be remembered that the number of lines after the column heading depends on the number of lines of the poem you are stylistically investigating. So easy, ra? This is the phase 2, and lastly, we are down to the last phase. So there are only 3 phases. The phase 3 now is narrative analysis of foregrounded parts and interpretation of the poems. Here, class, ay inyong mga nabasa, those that you have read from different sources, okay, related literature and related studies, you will be needing them to back up your claim, because here you are now going to analyze based on the way you are dissecting and based on the way you are categorizing. And after such, you are going to provide objective interpretation of the poems. And those objective interpretations could be based on maybe na-interview si author, or maybe what is the history or the experience of the author. And to make it more objective and to make it really research based, you have to mention here now those that you have read, katong mga nabasa ninyo sa inyong sa internet, sa PDF, we have literature, related literature and studies. So here you will do some in-text citations. And since when we are going to say, no, mag-conduct of stylistic investigation, that would be under gina siya sa College of Arts and Sciences giving nga mga topics, no? But since it's already offered here, so since in our case we are under the CTE, of course we will be using the American Psychological Association in-text citation, where we use the last name and then the year. Okay, we use the last name and then the year of the publication of such paper or resources that you have read. So phase 3, the narrative analysis of foregrounded parts and interpretation of the poems, is the third and final step to be done by the learners. So this phase does not have any matrix. So the matrices made in phase 1 and 2, those are the things you need in the last part of the analysis. Here you are going to say it in narrative form. Okay, narrative ba yan, diba? So in narration. So here the learners have to establish the connections and relationships among the foregrounded parts and the whole poem to have basis for their objective interpretation. And the learners' cognizance here, class, about poetic themes, mga background of the author, era when the poem is written, among others, are very essential. Your readings as well, the related literature and studies, are also required to suffice his or her explanations in order to have a solid claim of his or her findings. So this is what you're going to do for phase 3. And to give you really a very specific example, no, or for you not to imagine on how to do it really and just base it on description, let's take a look at a sample. So the sample stylistic investigations done here is actually looking into the select poem of Ropicor. Daghan man gud siya sa previous, but since I only cut and I only would like to show one, so select poem of Ropicor. So for your reference here is a sample stylistic investigation of Ropicor's poetry. So the phase mentioned are clearly illustrated below for your guidance. So number 1, what we are going to do is we are going to have okay, this is analysis and interpretation. This will be the title of our task, no, analysis and interpretation of the poem You Have Sadness. If you notice, this is a micro poem. When we say micro poem, these are really very short, which is, I believe, better for us to use lang mga short poems so that we won't be overwhelmed and we are going to enjoy the process, because if it's too long, it would be very overwhelming and it may not be enjoying to you. So the reason I make or I just mentioned the first line of the poem as the title, because the poem has no title, but this poem You Have Sadness, this is under the first chapter of Rupicor's book Milk and Honey. So the title of the first chapter is The Hurting, And one of the micro poems under the hurting is this. You have sadness. So let us try to take a look at how it is done. So for phase one, identification of foregrounded parts. So for the identification of foregrounded parts, so we have here now, you have sadness, no? So here, this is now the first line. You have sadness, and of course, the poem definitely has only 3 lines, which is really good. It's very short, and it's easy to do stylistic investigation using foregrounding theory of geophraseology. So we have here deviation and then parallelism. So let's try to take a look at. So you have sadness, no, all small letters. There is no punctuation because according to the conventions, diba? If you start writing, the first letter should always be in capital letter, but it's all small letters, no punctuation. So this is a deviation. Parallelism here. So repetition of the word sadness, okay, which is the last word in the first line and the first word in the last line, and it is being repeated here po, diba? Because you can see it, it's a repetition. Sadness being repeated, no, from the last C as a first line, you repeat po siya sa first or sa initial location sa last line. And according to the literary devices, such repetition of a word nga sa first line na asya, okay, na asya sa last portion of the first line, then na-repeat siya sa first, na asya sa initial position sa last line, we call it the anadiplosive. So i-write po din nyo siya. Yeah, ihatagan ninyo og description unsa daying anadiplosive, a repetition of the word sadness, which is the last word in the first line and the first word in the last line. So that means the word sadness here is being emphasized and must be something very important in the poem because it is being repeated, and that is already an example of parallelism. Foregrounded na siya. Number 2, the same problem, no deviation. It's just all the same, all small letters, no punctuation, and here also. And there is also some, something in the sound because there is a contraction going on and there is a deletion of the sound. So in that case, that is actually an example of phonological deviation. So what we are going to do is this sound omission is known as contraction. It is a type of elision, okay? And there is an absence of object after the transitive verb like. So sadness shouldn't like. Rearrangement of words, which is known as hyperbaton, is also present, no? Because it's a bit kung ano, sadness shouldn't like, diba? Supposed to be you shouldn't like sadness, not right? If the subject is present there, you should have said you shouldn't like sadness. So dapat si sadness arit at siya sa last, but there is rearrangement and we call it hyperbaton. And sadness here katuday ganiya class katong metaphor and even personification should be under the deviation because that is not they are not taking the dictionary meaning of the word. So same here, sadness shouldn't like. So there is an abstraction of the noun. The abstract noun sadness is being personified because if we are going to take a look at here, sadness shouldn't like, that means it's sadness who should not like, right? But sadness is not a person and it cannot either like or dislike. So you get what I mean? So in this case, this is also a deviation, and more or less what we deviate here is the semantic. So we deviate because we look into a different meaning. We deviate what is prescribed or what is only found in a dictionary by presenting it in a metaphor or by giving our own meaning. So this is how it should be done in phase 1, which is identification of foregrounded parts. And now we are going to take a look at phase 2, which is classification of foregrounded parts as the linguistic form. So now we already selected or identified the foregrounded parts in terms of deviation and parallelism. This time, our task is actually to identify them into their specific linguistic form. So kung mo tag all small letters, no punctuation, that definitely deviates the graphological aspect of the language. So that's why we are going to say it's graphological. Same here with line 2 and same with line 3, kanisya, diba? Pero sa line 3 class, it's not only graphological which is present. So it doesn't mean the one line will only have one deviation. Of course, it could have many. For example, this one, kaning sa sound omission, this is phonological. And if we are going to consider the rearrangement of words, okay, we are going to say that is grammatical. Okay, that is grammatical. And sadness here, as an abstract noun which is being personified, I already mentioned earlier, that is semantic. So we are now going to look at parallelism. So in line number 1 and line number 2, what is being repeated? It's just only a word, no? Specifically, it is anadiploses because depende bang siya kung asa siya na-repeat. Depende sa iyang location. So based on the location, it appears to be at the end of the first line and happen to be found at the beginning of the last line. That is, or the next line or the last line, that could be anadiploses. So since it's just a repetition of the word, ang level raan niya or ang form niya is lexical. So now we are done with phase 2. Okay, nahumana nato og identifying division, we also, and parallelism, as well as we finished already identifying as well the linguistic form of both types of foregrounded parts that we identified. Okay, so now let's try to take a look at now narrative analysis and interpretation of You Have Sadness. So You Have Sadness, because the poems of Rupikor, some of them come with illustration. So it doesn't mean because we are only looking into the words, no, sa ato ang pagkatong we actually have it in matrix, dili na nato siya i-appeal sa tong analysis and interpretation ang image. So since there is illustration, we have to really present it already, how it is found or how it is presented in the book or in your source. And this is how it is presented. This is the micro poem, and these are the following illustrations that go with it. So this is how you are going to analyze and interpret it. So this micro poem consists, okay, imujong kong pila ka book lines, okay, consists of 3 striking lines and is accompanied by an illustration of a girl and a boy as shown in the image beside the lines, diba? Naa siya besides a line. Since it uses a second person point of view, which is you, it aims to give an advice to a person. Okay? Usually, class, pag ang atuang if our imperative ang atong sentence, no, we are giving advice, or shall we say request, or something pertaining to the person. So by looking at the illustration, it would be fair to say that the speaker here does not only throw these words of advice to a woman, but also to a man, since the illustration shows an image of them and both, okay, can feel sadness, diba? It's not only a man, the man or the woman, both of them can feel sadness. So though Kaur, okay, the author here, Rupi Kaur, being a feminist, because if you are going to search on her background, she is a certified feminist, no? Would have addressed all her poems to women, okay, not only those from racial minorities, but also those from the dominance of white culture. You know already, class, dominant by ang white culture, the West, okay, or those people who are white basically are considered to be superior than those people who are black or brown, you know, that is, you know, in the thinking, that is our notion. So now here, why did I say that? Because I read a specific study, no, written by Maria Valle, and it happened to be found in page 2 of her paper, or of his paper. So the thing is, because of that, I have to mention her or him. I could already forgot because last name being Maria Valle. So here, in our case, since when you are going to do it, you have to consider the year, no? Kay education students man mo. So if we are going to have the APA citation, we are going to put a comma after here, and then we are going to write here the year of publication. So ingon ana ang paagi sa inyo, ha. Then, thus focusing all our discussions on women, okay? Supposedly, mo focus ta sa both on ta, pero since core here is feminist, so probably most of her poems, if not all, really are being addressed to women. So that would be the focus of our discussion. That's why we are going to focus on women, which Jindal 800 enunciated that the speaker is a female at an early age who was sexually abused by males in her family, her father included, and that she comes from an environment and history in which women are treated cruelly. I already told you the 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 experience of Rupi Kaur is also savage, no? Because she is an Indian, and you know already, class, the catastrophe also that's going on, no, in that country. So in fact, it is definitely present. No, there is this oppression, okay, and men really consider themselves really mighty or really, shall we say, superior. So it's just that it's very evident lang it's India as what based on my reading. So this notion is also, ako'y mga ebidensya ha, why did I say it? This notion is also accentuated by Decca 611 as feminism perspective is very conspicuous among Kaur's works in her book, Milk and Honey. So the persona of the poem is the author herself, since Kaur, as the author, tells the truth of her experiences through her poetry. And that's what Joseph I claimed, whose intention is to give notes or a piece of advice to a woman who is enveloped with sadness. So, introduction pa ko. So the poem, Your Sadness is Noticed to have foregrounded parts. So now ako nang gitag-sa-tagsa ang akong nakita. No, mainly the entire micropoem, okay, is graphologically deviated. It's true, di ba? Tanan, linya. The poem is broken into 3 lines. The structure of the standard English is to write the entire stanza in a line, especially if the entire thing fits in a single line. So murabag, ang iyahang style dire is iyahang gibuak-buak. Ang usa ka sentence unta or ang mga linya nga pwede ra kita siyang usahon. But she broke it down and created a poem out of the broken, parcels, out of the broken portions of such line, no? Katong atong taas nga linya, kay gimong tan-awon pwede ra biya gid siya usahon, right? So in addition, there is no single punctuation used. Leach 47 classified this violation in terms of the language's orthography, including spacing and punctuation, as graphological deviation. Jimenez 71 delineated that such deviation is prominent in stylistics and multimodality, which may affect meaning and may result to the production of aesthetic effects in the text. When we say aesthetic effects, more or less, pang-physical lang siya, okay? Or beauty, di ba? Sa imuhang write-up, you put a beauty in it by deviating the punctuation, by deviating how you should write it in graph or in a graphological, in a right graphological manner. That is why, class, if you could find, there are poetry nga ang iyang shape, if imong tan-awon, mahimong siya nga shape sa isa ka langga, mahimong siyang shape sa buwak. So that is an example, diba? It's for the aesthetic, and definitely not with siya meaning, ma-change po iyang meaning. So moreover, nagkuhan ko sa first line pa to siya and the entire line because may graphological deviation din lang sa line 1 but the entire poetry, no? Moreover, the second line, which modifies the noun sadness and completes the statement, has no punctuation at the end. So, wala gi punctuation. So, the absence of punctuation mark is pushing the readers now to continue reading the next line. Di ba pag walay punctuation, walay closure. So, pag walay closure, mangita ba yung tag-asay sumpay? Parehara good na in a relationship. If there is no closure, you would always seek for, is there still something going on? So, we are going to look for something until we can find a closure. Same with poetry, di ba? If there is no period, walay closure. So, we go to the next line para ato siyang basahon na pud because there could be additional information. Okay? So, to continue reading the next line, which is sadness shouldn't like this, already the last line, and it is another hanging statement, right? Also, the way Kaur begins her piece with a small letter is a palpable or clear violation on the standards of capitalization and decapitalization. As learned in school, the first letter of a line must start with a capital letter, which Kaur fails to show. So, reading the first line of this entry, gives a pushing effect. Pushing meaning i-push ang reader nga mangita siya sa next nga line since there is no punctuation at all and no closure. To readers as its construction suggests the addendum of a modifier which modifies the noun sadness. And line 2 satisfies the readers who became thirsty of a modifier after reading the first line. However, it is not the end of the journey as score opens another statement found on its third line. The third line here is a hanging statement which again does not have a punctuation mark. The absence of punctuation mark brings the readers in the world of wonder. Wala, nag-wonder na ang mga reader no, as they start to ask and guess if what sadness should not like. Thus, a clear manifestation of the absence of an object which should have had followed after the word like. Okay, so this is a grammatical deviation of this line. Aside from the absence of an object, this grammatical deviation can also be seen in a different angle as the rearrangement of the structure by placing the word sadness as the subject and deletion of you as the supposed implied subject resulted to a semantic deviation of the word sadness. So this abstract word is now being personified because of the absence of the noun or the subject you, diba? So because sadness shouldn't like, which supposedly the correct structure is you shouldn't like sadness. So this personification is called by Leach as humanizing metaphor, which is an example of semantic deviation. So in addition, the last line shows phonological deviation due to the contraction of the words should and not. So the omission of the vowel sound deviates the line phonologically. The deletion of the vowel sound is known as elision. Okay. Moreover, this poem has parts which suggest pattern. When we say pattern, the repetition now. According to the theory of foregrounding, we call it parallelism. So the parallel parts found in this work of Core is identified on line 1 and line 3. The last word of first line, which is sadness, is the opening word of the final line. So Leach on page 81 named this as anadiplosis, okay? Which he explained that the last part of one unit is repeated at the beginning part of the next. So this lexical repetition intensifies or emphasizes, intensifies the sound of this poem, which Core wants to create. So what about Core here wants us to really imagine or sink into the mind ang word of sadness. Also, this repetition signifies that the word sadness is obviously being emphasized by the author. So the emphasis of sadness pours the majority of the weight in this word. So since ginabalik-balik, na kay gustong ipaabot, di ba? This implies that this is an existing issue now and that many people, especially women out there, feel this emotion. So now, nagpadung na ko sa gitawag og interpretation, di ba? Kay ako na siyang kuanan ako siya, gi-start na ako siya og kuan sa symbolism. So this kind of emotion, when felt, must not be taken to the point that it can destroy one's being. Perhaps the message of the third line, sadness shouldn't like, tries to remind women, kay feminism ba ya, diba? Empowering women. Remind women that no matter how sad they felt, they must step up to fight against sadness in order not to be killed by it. Not to be killed by it. More so, the deviated parts that occur at the last line of the poem intensifies more the significance of sadness in this poem. On the other hand, Core's usage of lowercase throughout the poem, at nagihatagan na siya interpretation, no? Ang usage sa lowercase throughout the poem is a strong message of the speaker of the poem, Core, telling everyone the importance and value of equality, which she wanted to visualize in her work. Kaur also mentioned that she took the inspiration from her mother tongue Punjabi, written in Shamoki or Gurmukhi script, where uppercase or lowercase letters do not exist, and all letters are treated with equalness. So same, people should be treated equally. So Maria Valli on page 3 affirmed that this graphological deviant is taken from her Punjabi heritage. So to sum it up, diba? In totality, this poem of course presents graphological grammatical, semantic, and phonological deviations. Also, it shows parallelism and are found on the lexical form. The repetition of the word sadness is lexical in nature. Coarse poetry is known to have no distinct rhythm or rhyme scheme at the end of every line, as emphasized by Kali in page 1. The foregrounded parts of the poem altogether give the readers an interpretation that the persona of this poem in the person of the author herself focuses her discussion on the emotion, which is sadness. Her emphasis on this word pushed her to modify it as an emotion which is present anywhere, which lives in not a single place but in a lot of, which lives rather, not lives, sorry, is present anywhere, which lives in not a single place but in a lot of places. Her way of adding the third line is a reminder provided for her women readers, okay, most of her readers are women, obviously, no, that sadness should not be kept internally and not be liked. Perhaps the presence of negative words shouldn't in the third line is a suggestion from Core that sadness is negative and that humanity, especially women, are swamped with negative emotions such as sadness, must not deal and keep it inside. Not keeping sadness in one's heart provides women happy hearts and positive dispositions. Sadness should be felt short time and not to be kept for long term. After all, nobody wants to feel pain and sad. Rather, everyone only wants to be happy, and that is what will keep one to continue living and enjoy the beauty this beautiful world offers. Core emphasizes that women feel happy when they are appreciated and when they are treated at par with men. It is according to Dumaligan on page 1. And this is the end of your analysis and interpretation. So ang pinakamadugo diri class, of course, the narrative. Pero mas solid ang imong narration, analysis, the narrative analysis and interpretation if you have backup claims as mentioned by different authors na nagkandak na pud og study similar to yours about that specific poem. Okay? So, I hope na amoy nakatunan sa kaninga video lecture, and I hope also class you really don't find it very, very difficult. It's really easy, you know. We are going to do stylistic investigation, especially for grounding parts. And what you are going to do is to take from your packet your cognizance or your prowess about linguistics, about language itself, and you are going to connect them, okay? And of course, scrutinize first the poem, and then after, get all the things you have, all those knowledge you have about linguistic forms, and just be guided by the theory of foregrounding, and you will be in good shape. And also follow the phases, phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. I believe I gave you a short poem as well. It's written by E.E. Cummings. So I hope you learned a thing or two from this video lecture. Thank you very much, class, for spending your time or allocating time to watch this video lecture. And also, our midterm exam is fast approaching, obviously. That would be next week. And I also shared on our Google Classroom the schedule. So our exam is all multiple choice, 1 to 50 items. And I hope you will study. God bless you for the exam. Keep safe, everyone, and good luck, okay? Thank you so much, and bye, everyone. I'll see you on our feedbacking, definitely after the midterm exam. I will schedule a feedbacking. Okay, so thank you very much, and good luck, and God bless. Bye-bye, everyone.